At this time, I'd like to recognize our President's Medal honorees. This award is given to the law school's most accomplished community members. Our first honoree is Professor Stephen Ellmann. Steve is a beloved and longtime member of our faculty, an award-winning author, and an expert in clinical legal education, constitutional law, and South African law. As a director of our clinical and experiential learning program, he has helped to lead the law school's expansion of opportunities for students to develop critical practical lawyering skills. Many of our graduates who spoke earlier testified to the power of these programs. He also launched the Clinical Theory Workshop, which has met at New York Law School since 1992. The workshop has been attended by law professors from around the nation and has been a key driver in clinical legal education. Steve has focused on human rights and constitutional law issues for much of his career. Early on, he served as a staff attorney at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama. There, he worked on voting rights cases, anti-Ku Klux Klan suits, defense work in capital murder trials, and so much more. Since the September 11 attacks, he's written on racial profiling as a response to terrorism and reshaping the law of war to better protect human rights. He has long been interested in South Africa, and he co-chairs the law school's South Africa Reading Group. He has written extensively on human rights in South Africa, both before and after the end of apartheid, and he is currently at work on a biography of South Africa's late Chief Justice Arthur Chaskalson. Steve, please join me at the podium. We are grateful for Steve's deep and lasting contributions to the law school and for his lifelong work to advance social justice and uphold the constitutional principles our community holds dear. Congratulations.
Well, first, congratulations to all of you from the class of 2018. And I also want to offer a special shout out to the members of the Fall 2015 Legislation and Regulation Evening Section, who were not only smart, but also, when the chips were down that fall and I faced a serious medical issue, were supportive to me as their professor. I want to thank you all for that. And I join all of you from that section and from the school in mourning the loss of one of the impressive members of that section, Martin Banks. Second, thank you. Thank you so much to Dean Crowell, the Board of Trustees, the New York Law School faculty and student community, which I've been so fortunate to be part of since 1992, for this honor today, and for the chance to be in the company of a really wonderful set of men and women being honored at the same time. New York Law School welcomed me a long time ago, and it's been the place where I've prospered as a teacher and a scholar in a community of very talented colleagues. Thank you to all of you. And thank you to my dear wife, Teresa, over there in this section, who's been my partner through most of these years. Third, I know the theme of today's graduation is lead locally, impact globally, and I want to take a few minutes to talk about South Africa, which, as you've just heard, has been a major focus of my work throughout my years here. You've also just heard that I've been writing a biography of a man named Arthur Chaskalson, who in the old days, meaning back in the 1950s and 60s, was a leading anti-apartheid lawyer who represented Nelson Mandela and many others. He went on in 1979 to found the Legal Resources Center, the premier public interest law organization in South Africa. Then he helped negotiate the post-apartheid constitution, and then in 1994 he was appointed by now President Nelson Mandela as the first head of the country's new post-apartheid constitutional court. He was also a friend of mine for 25 years until his death in 2012. Our friendship, in a sense, grew out of work I had done as a new lawyer. You've just heard a little bit about it, practicing civil rights law at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama. When I went to South Africa at Arthur Chaskelson's invitation in 1988, I found lawyers doing the kind of work I had done in Alabama, except with the whole government against them and no constitution to protect them. What they did have, amazingly, was a real tradition of courts maintaining the rule of law. Thinking about South Africa, in my experience, means thinking about the rule of law. Now, I do have to admit that thinking a lot about the rule of law is probably a sign of advancing age. Many of you have, in one class or another, learned, what a surprise, that law is not perfect. The rule of law does not always function. Law is supposed to be clear and often is unclear. It is supposed to be equal and often is the tool of the powerful. All of those critical observations and more have truth to them, but they're not the whole story. The fact is that we all want to believe in the rule of law at least some of the time. We may all want to drive 70 in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. You don't have to tell me if that applies to you. But we definitely do not want to be pulled over on that same highway when we're driving safely below the speed limit and then told that a special law just written by the police officer that very day makes us count as lawbreakers. That's what the rule of law prevents. We trust that our law, has some measure of definiteness and stability. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but in South Africa, lawyers like Arthur Chaskelson used that kind of principle, some measure of definiteness and stability, to fight back against apartheid in the courts of South Africa itself. And as we look around the political scene in the US today, are we really prepared to say that some measure of definiteness and stability isn't really important? But other than keeping things more or less stable, is there any point to the rule of law? Or is it really fundamentally conservative? Again, an old person's natural obsession. Arthur Chaskelson's answer was essentially the opposite of that claim. It was that the rule of law could be and should be part of the fight for justice. I think, having learned from Arthur and from South Africa, that whether the rule of law is conservative or liberal depends on what kind of law you've got and maybe even more on what you do with it. Arthur saw human dignity as a key constitutional value embedded in the law and as a mandate for transformation, and not just as an abstraction. He said in an important case that as long as South Africans lived in conditions of gross inequality, as so many people here do too, they were being denied dignity, and the Constitution's aspirations, these are his words, will have a hollow ring. Now, again, I have to admit that it helps when you're trying to use law as a source for transformation to have a constitution whose text was written in 1996 rather than in 1787. But American judges also have seen human dignity as a key constitutional value. And many of you who took part in New York Law School's own clinics have already had the experience of using law, the rule of law, to promote justice here at home. I don't know whether human dignity is the key to our constitutional dilemmas or what the best solutions to our social and legal problems will be. I do know that you are now in a position to join the effort to find those solutions using the knowledge and the moral commitments you've been building as law students. I hope you'll be successful in that and every way. Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you so much, Steve. I now welcome our second President's Medal honoree, Christina Storm. Christina is a member of the class of 1977, and she is the founder and executive director of Lawyers Without Borders, an international nonprofit that harnesses the pro bono volunteer services of lawyers and judges to perform critical human rights and social justice work around the world. From its humble beginnings in Hartford, Connecticut, and of course drawing upon the immense resources of the New York City legal community, Lawyers Without Borders has expanded to nearly every continent. Its volunteer programs encompass child labor, civil rights, corruption, human trafficking, gender-based violence, and other social justice issues in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and regions emerging from conflict. The organization maintains a neutral approach and emphasizes justice sector capacity building in its work. It also cultivates professional development and a commitment to pro bono work among the young lawyers and law students who volunteer. In addition to serving as the executive director, Christina designs the educational programming that anchors the organization, and programs developed by Lawyers Without Borders are regularly recognized as among the finest examples of pro bono work in the profession. The program has attracted volunteer lawyers from the top ranks of the AmLaw 100 and the United Kingdom's Magic Circle firms. Through her work, Christina has enabled many in the profession to use their skills in service of those most in need. Christina, please join me at the podium. Today, we honor Christina's profound commitment to the law school's values and ideals as the founder and leader of Lawyers Without Borders, and her work to advance human rights and promote the rule of law around the world. Congratulations.
Good afternoon, Justice Breyer. It's an honor. Dean Crowell, trustees, faculty, graduating students, family, and honored guests. Alex consulted Alexa. Alexa's my best friend. And Alexa said, go personal. So I'm just going to deviate from my remarks for one brief second and do something that all of the graduated students fear all of the time, and all of the parents probably enjoy doing immensely, and that is embarrassing their children. When I became a lawyer, the judge who admitted us all said, the law is a jealous mistress. She said, know that. That will be true now and for the rest of your life. As a result, some of you may remember that you forget birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, and special moments. On May 15th, I forgot to wish my daughter happy birthday, and this morning I forgot to wish my son happy birthday. So Preston and Lizzie, please stand up as we wish you happy birthday. Now back to what brings us here today. As you can imagine, when you reach my age, Simone de Beauvoir calls it a certain age, and Dean Crowell tells me I need to tell you that Simone de Beauvoir was a feminist French thinker and writer, because he said the millennials won't understand who she is, Christina. When we look back from this age, we see quite an eyeful. I call it the rear view mirror, retrospective. And for me, it started in earnest around the age of 50, when I came to the startling realization that all those crooked lines in my life as a youth were beginning to make real sense. Life was no longer a puzzle. There was clarity of purpose, meaning, and logic to what happened and why, but all of it was in retrospect. It also became clear that it wasn't a stretch to say that my life was punctuated with New York moments at critical junctures. Not the least among those was New York Law School. Combined with my worldly curiosity and my willingness to treat my time on this planet as an adventure, these had everything to do with the journey that I suspect is responsible for bringing me here today and this honor that I'm receiving. By the age of 5, I had experienced regular forays into New York, literally from the cow fields of Connecticut, where as children we often entertained ourselves taunting bulls from behind the safety of barbed wire fences. I was familiar with the Metropolitan Opera and cried like a baby when they tore it down. No December came and went without a day trip to the New York City Center Ballet to see the Nutcracker. Pilgrimages to Rockefeller Center for ice skating, the Metropolitan Museum, Chinatown, and the sidewalk residents of the Bowery were not uncommon. My grandfather wanted me to see the Bowery, which in my day was not the she spot it is today, to alert me to the fact that there are places in the world where people sleep on sidewalks. I suspect that lesson stuck with me. At 17, I selected the one and only college from a list of all girls' schools that I was allowed to choose from, 4 in Massachusetts and 1 in Purchase, New York, a 30-minute commute from Manhattan. I selected, you guessed it, the one in New York. 3 years later, I was at my first law job on Park Avenue, and 1 year after that, I was camped out at New York Law School in the Dean of Admissions office, Dean Margaret Bairn, arguing my case for admission to the law school. As I saw it, she stood in the way between me and my destiny. Possibly influenced by a popular movie at the time, now known as Godfather 1, I was heard to say, as I turned her away from her office, "Admit me, you won't regret it." Don't let the name Storm fool you. I am Italian through and through. My New York Law School education and my New York training held me in good stead. While at New York Law School, I was mentored by adjunct professors Maurice Nesson, one of the founding partners of the firm you all know now as Kramer Levin, and Milton Gould, a named partner in the firm then a lion in the industry, Shea Gould. I learned contracts and torts at the hands of the famous professors Dugan and Koffler. In the interest of brevity, I won't trace my life as a trial lawyer, except to say I had a successful law practice, earned a reputation for high ethical standards and toughness that synced well with my name, leaving behind a legion of clients who continue to believe that I was then and am now the cat's meow. Fast forward to 1995, and the idea struck me to start giving back. After practicing law in Connecticut for roughly 20 years, the first thing I did was head back to New York, but not just New York, back to New York Law School to consult with Dean Shapiro and Professor Nesson about my idea to launch Lawyers Without Borders. They introduced me to possibly one of the most influential lawyers in New York at the time. He thought my idea would never survive a host of obstacles and challenges, and he discouraged me from proceeding with it in the strongest possible terms. As we walked out of his office, Professor Nesson was direct and to the point. Pay no attention to what you've just heard. He was actually a little more succinct than that. The F word comes to mind. Dean Shapiro echoed his sentiments, but a little more politely. Do it. It's a good idea. We're here if you need us. The rest is history. I pitched to the lawyers in big law here in New York. They responded enthusiastically to the concept that pro bono could and should go international, and that there was value to harnessing New York's finest legal talent to get the job done. Last year, we celebrated a first. Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor joined our program in Tanzania. Justice Breyer, we need to talk. At a talk I gave at Oberlin College last month, a student told me he wanted to do the kind of work I was doing, and he asked me how he should go about charting his course. My advice seemed to resonate with him, and to be honest, I think it probably reflected what I unwittingly followed these last 40 years. I said, imagine yourself here on a stage in front of hundreds of people looking back. How do you want your story to read? Make that your path forward. I have a saying that I urge you to take to heart, no matter how inauspicious your beginnings may have been. No one but you gets to be the author of your narrative. And add to that some sage advice from Old Blue Eyes. And again, I have to explain to you that Old Blue Eyes was Frank Sinatra, because the millennials won't get it. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And then buckle up for the most spectacular ride of your life as a lawyer. So, thank you, New York Law School, for believing in me, for taking me at my word, and for including me and honoring me on this your very special day.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was wonderful.